Every day, a German shepherd stared into a storm drain, unmoving, haunted. No one knew why, until the cover was pried open. What lay beneath would unravel a hidden past, silent loyalty, and a truth that would shake the entire town. This isn't just a dog story. It's a revelation. The dog came every morning, always just after dawn, before the school buses started their rumble, and long before the bakery's sweet steam curled into Main Street. The German shepherd would appear like clockwork. Silent, intent, alone. He'd pad across the edge of Dawson Lane, fur grizzled with age and exposure, and stop beside the rusted grate set into the old storm drain at the corner. There, he would lower his head, sniff once, and stare long and hard into the darkness below. He never barked, he never whined. He only watched. And then, after maybe 5, maybe 10 minutes, he would retreat back the way he came, always in the direction of the tree line that bordered the abandoned textile mill. At first, no one noticed. Dogs roamed Cedar Hollow sometimes, farm dogs chasing scent trails too far, the odd mutt passing through. But this shepherd was different. He was thin, sure, ribs showing a little more each week, but he moved with quiet purpose, like a soldier on a mission. His eyes, amber and alert, seemed too knowing to dismiss. The first to take real notice was Josie Lockhart, a 7th grader who walked her little brother Levi to the bus stop every morning. She was the one who gave him a name. "Ghost," she told her mom one evening, "because he never makes a sound, and no one sees where he goes." Her mom laughed it off. Probably just a stray with a routine? But Josie knew better. Every day she passed the corner, the dog was there, watching that drain, ears tense, tail still. By the 2nd week, she started bringing him scraps from her lunch, a piece of ham folded in a napkin, a crust of toast. She'd lay it near the grate and step back. Ghost never approached until she was gone. But the food always disappeared. One morning, a heavy rain had fallen all night, and the ground steamed in the sudden burst of sun. Josie came early, a soggy cheese sandwich in hand, and saw him standing there again, soaked, unmoving, his gaze locked on the drain. That time she didn't leave right away. She stayed behind the old maple at the corner and watched. What she saw chilled her. The dog leaned in closer to the grate, pawing gently at the edge. Then he lowered his head and let out the softest sound, a kind of low, aching hum that vibrated more than it rang, a sound that felt like grief. That day, she told her teacher. By the following afternoon, the story had spread, first to parents, then to the librarian, and finally to Joe Thompson, the town's aging sheriff. Joe had seen a lot in his years, people with their ghost stories and misplaced good intentions. But something in Josie's eyes when she told him, something in the way her voice broke when she said, "He's waiting for something, or someone," stuck with him. So the next morning, Joe went to the corner himself. Ghost was already there, head bowed to the drain, tail still. Joe parked down the block, careful not to spook him, and approached slow. "You waiting on someone, boy?" he called out gently. Ghost didn't flinch, didn't even glance back. Joe stepped closer, boots crunching on gravel, and then he heard it, a sound from the drain, not from Ghost, but from somewhere deep inside, faint, muffled, but undeniably alive. Joe dropped to one knee, pressing his ear near the grate. Another sound, a scraping, then a whimper. His blood went cold. He pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff Thompson. I need public works out at Dawson Lane. We got movement in a storm drain, and I think there's something, or someone, alive down there." Ghost finally turned then, looked Joe in the eye. And in that look there was no fear, only something that felt dangerously close to relief. It took 2 hours to get the right crew out there, another hour to pry the rusted grate free. By then, a small crowd had gathered. Teachers, kids, a few neighbors, and Josie standing dead center, gripping Levi's hand like a lifeline. The dog didn't move the whole time. When they finally cracked the grate open and shone a flashlight down into the pitch-black tunnel, everyone leaned in, holding their breath. What they saw stopped them cold, a pair of eyes, glowing faintly in the beam of the light, blinking back slowly from the darkness. Then another. 3 tiny shapes, barely visible, crouched at the bend of the tunnel. Puppies, matted, mud-caked, but alive. Joe's voice shook as he spoke into his radio again. "Call Blue Ridge Wildlife and get me a vet. We've got a miracle in a drain pipe." Gasps echoed through the crowd as one of the pups crawled forward, unsteady and shivering. A faint yip, like a cry swallowed by days of silence. And still, Ghost didn't move. Only when the rescue team descended into the pipe, gently lifting the pups one by one into waiting blankets, did he rise to his feet. He stepped forward slowly, ears back as if asking permission. Josie stepped aside. "Let him," she whispered. No one stopped him. He padded to the edge of the drain, sniffed the air, and then, with the kind of gentleness that breaks something deep in the heart, nudged each pup's head with his nose. They yipped, weak but reaching for him. Someone in the crowd began to cry. No one laughed. Because suddenly, they all understood. He hadn't been watching the drain. He had been guarding it. The town changed after that day. Not in the way newspapers like to say, with parades or grand speeches. But in the subtle, quieter way, things shift when people witness something they can't quite explain, and it lingers in their bones. The storm drain was sealed with a new grate, one that wouldn't rust through. Joe made sure of that. He even ordered a custom lock for it, though no one said out loud what they were really afraid of. No one wanted another miracle trapped underground. The puppies were taken to the animal clinic on Miller Street. 3 of them. The smallest one, barely a pound, and mostly ears. A second, with a crooked front paw that made her limp. And the third, the biggest, who had a scar over his left eye like he'd fought for every bite of food. They named them Hope, Clover, and Rusty. They were weak, but stable. The vet, Dr. Halbrook, said they'd likely been down there for at least a week, maybe more. "Surviving off rainwater and grit," she said, shaking her head as she cleaned the scarred one's paw. They were lucky, but they weren't alone. Everyone knew what she meant. Ghost had been feeding them. No one had seen it, not with their own eyes, but the evidence was everywhere once you looked. Old takeout containers dragged near the grate. Bits of torn packaging. A half-eaten rotisserie chicken found discarded in the brush nearby. The kind of scavenged offerings that only a dog might think to share. He hadn't just found them. He'd cared for them. And not once had he asked for help. The town didn't know what to do with that kind of loyalty. It unsettled something deep down, especially in people who'd looked past Ghost for weeks, maybe months. Those who had seen him as just another stray with bones under skin, a burden on the edge of sight. Now, he was something else. Still, no one could get close. Even after the puppies were safe and warm in thick blankets, Ghost kept his distance. He lingered outside the vet's office for 2 days, lying just beyond the edge of the parking lot, eyes fixed on the door. Josie brought him food. Others did too. No one approached, though, not after Sheriff Joe tried to slip a leash over his neck, and Ghost pulled back, not with aggression, but with a sadness that made Joe step away and tip his hat. "Not ready," he muttered. "Or maybe doesn't trust us to keep watch." So they waited. And in the waiting, something gentle unfolded. People who hadn't spoken in years stopped to chat near the vet's office. An elderly man brought an old dog bed from his porch and left it near the shrubs. A teenager left a painted rock with 3 paw prints etched in blue. Ghost slept near the bed, but never on it. Every evening, just before sunset, he'd rise and trot to the edge of the tree line, then disappear into the woods, only to return again by morning. It became a ritual. And then, on the 4th night, he didn't come back. Josie cried that morning. She'd stayed up all night painting a little sign for him. "Thank you, Ghost." She'd planned to set it near the drain, but there was no one to read it. Joe checked the shelters. Others checked the roads. Nothing. For 2 days, Cedar Hollow held its breath. Then, late on the 3rd night, a call came in from a woman named Elaine Thomas, who lived in the old caretaker's house near the mill. She was barely coherent on the phone. I heard barking," she said. "Real late. Thought it was coyotes. But then I saw the eyes. So many eyes. Down in the cellar?" Joe didn't hesitate. When he arrived, the woman was waiting on her porch in a robe, her hands trembling. She pointed to the side of the house. "Down there, behind the old door." The mill had long been abandoned, its outbuildings slowly crumbling under ivy and rot. Most people avoided it. Kids whispered about ghosts. But as Joe stepped inside the half-collapsed stairwell leading to the cellar, he felt something different than fear. He felt purpose. The air was damp, rank with mildew and rust. His flashlight flickered once, then steadied. That's when he saw them. Not just Ghost, but dogs. 6, maybe 7, huddled near the far wall, half of them pups, others older but frail. Ghost stood in front of them, tail stiff, ears forward, not growling but not yielding either. "Easy, boy," Joe said gently. "You're not in trouble." He crouched low, flashlight pointed to the ground. Ghost didn't move. But one of the dogs behind him did, a young black mutt with 2 large paws who crept forward and sniffed the air toward Joe. Then another, limping. Then a third. Ghost let them pass, and in that moment, Joe understood. Ghost wasn't just a rescuer. He was a guardian, a shepherd, in every sense of the word. When they finally brought the animals out, one crate at a time, slow and quiet, neighbors came again. People who'd heard about the storm drain pups came back with crates and blankets and bowls of water. Someone brought Ghost's bed from the clinic and laid it near the truck. Still, Ghost held back until the last of the rescued dogs was safe. Only then did he step out of the cellar. He didn't need to be leashed. He followed. Not because anyone made him, but because, at last, he had seen enough. That night, he curled up in the dog bed under the porch of the vet's office, and for the first time in weeks, closed his eyes completely. Josie was there, watching from the grass, and before she left, she whispered, "You brought them back, all of them." He didn't wake, but his tail thumped once against the porch. The porch became his home. Ghost still didn't wear a collar, still didn't come when called. But everyone knew where he belonged now. Not claimed, not owned, but welcomed. And in a town like Cedar Hollow, that meant more. Each morning, he would rise before dawn and make his rounds. Past the bakery where Old Man Ellery started the ovens before the sun. Down the quiet stretch near Josie's family store, where he'd sit for a while, not begging, just watching. Sometimes she'd leave out a piece of ham or a corner of toast. He'd wait until she went inside before eating it. By the time the kids walked to school, he'd already be gone again. No one knew where he disappeared to during those stretches of silence. Some said he patrolled the woods. Others thought he visited the storm drain, checking, confirming. And maybe he did. Because a few times, people driving the back road swore they saw him standing by that drain, nose lowered like he was still listening for cries that no one else could hear. But he always came back. And with him came change. The puppies from the storm drain and the cellar, now called Ghost's Pups around town, began to heal. Hope, the smallest, found her voice first. She barked with a high-pitched squeak that startled herself. Rusty, the scarred one, took longest to trust people. But one afternoon, he followed a boy in a wheelchair across the vet's lawn and laid his head on the kid's lap. They named the boy as his foster. Clover, the limper, had surgery to correct her foot. Donations came in from all over. Someone posted Ghost's story online, and it caught like wildfire, shared by rescue groups, picked up by local news. Headlines called him a canine hero, a four-legged angel. But those who saw him every day just called him Ghost, even when the shelter offered to find him a home. Cedar Hollow hesitated. They didn't want to lose him, not because they needed a mascot, but because he'd become something more, a presence, a kind of soft gravity. He didn't stay in one place, didn't sleep in the same spot twice, but he was everywhere, at the school fence during recess, under the church awning during rain, on the hill above the cemetery just after dusk. And slowly, something deeper started to stir. It began with a man named Thomas Rowe. He'd lived on the outskirts for years, a recluse after his wife passed. People whispered that he didn't speak much anymore, that he hadn't smiled since her funeral. But one afternoon, Josie found him sitting outside the vet's office, with Ghost beside him. He didn't say much, just scratched behind the dog's ears and said, "She would have liked him." After that, other stories trickled in. A woman battling cancer found him waiting by her gate one morning, like he knew she needed company. A family whose dog had run away weeks earlier saw Ghost lead them to a grove near the old mill, where their dog was caught in a wire fence, alive but trapped. Ghost never barked, never howled. But he guided. And people began to wonder, was he really a stray? Or was he something else? Someone hung a hand-painted sign on the fence near the vet's porch. Guardian of Cedar Hollow. Someone else placed a collar nearby, not to claim him, just to honor him. It had no name tag, only a carved charm that read, "Found." No one put it on him. But a few days later, Ghost came back from one of his quiet walks, wearing it. No one knew how. One night, Josie sat on the porch beside him, her knees drawn to her chest. "You know," she whispered, "people used to say animals came into your life for a reason. But I didn't really believe it until you." Ghost didn't move, just stared out into the darkening street. "You saved those pups, but I think you saved a lot of us too." Her voice caught on the last word. The porch light hummed above them. Down the street, a wind chime rustled. "You taught us how to look again, how to listen." The town had changed, yes, but more than that, people had changed. They noticed things now. The way an old man's hands trembled while tying his shoes, the weight in a child's shoulders when he walked alone, the crack in the vet's voice when she thought no one could hear her praying over the animals each night. Ghost had made them look where they hadn't before. Beneath, beyond, inside. But just as he'd come without warning, the next morning, he was gone. Not in the way he left for his daily rounds. This time, it was different. He didn't come back that night, or the one after. Josie left food, a blanket. Nothing touched. Joe checked the mill, the drain, the grove near the fence. No tracks, no fur, no sound. For a week, the town waited. And then the dreams started. It wasn't just one person. That's what made it strange. It was a dozen. then 24. They all described the same thing. A vast field, tall grass swaying in golden light. And Ghost, standing in the center, tail still, eyes watching. But peaceful, not calling, just being. And somehow, each person woke up feeling okay, as if the part of them that had been torn or aching had been seen and eased. No one said the word goodbye. It didn't feel right. It felt more like a hand on your back, steadying you before you took a step. In the weeks that followed, the puppies were adopted, one by one. Not just in town. People drove in from miles away, drawn by the story, by something they couldn't name. But every new family said the same thing when they first met the pup they'd chosen. It's like they already know us. As if Ghost had passed along something in silence, an instinct, a message, a kind of grace. Cedar Hollow never forgot him. They didn't build a statue. They built a small garden beside the drain, where it all began. Native flowers, smooth stones, and in the center a wooden post with a plaque that read, "He looked where others didn't. He listened when we wouldn't. Thank you, Ghost. You showed us how to love again." The garden became a place of quiet visits. It wasn't flashy. No marble angels or polished plaques. Just soft earth, shaded by an old birch, and a bench made from reclaimed wood, where people could sit when words failed. Someone left fresh water in a bowl, just in case. Someone else planted marigolds, because they said Ghost would have liked the color. But even with his absence, Ghost was everywhere. Stories filtered in from far beyond Cedar Hollow now. A couple from the next county over said a dog matching Ghost's description led them away from a frozen riverbank after they'd lost their way in a blizzard. When they turned to thank him, he was gone. A ranger in the state park said he spotted a white dog staring down into a ravine, tail still, posture alert. The ranger followed the gaze and found an injured hiker, unconscious but alive. Ghost? Maybe. Maybe not. The mystery only deepened his legend. But for Josie, it wasn't about stories anymore. It was personal. She'd stopped thinking of Ghost as a dog. He was the thread that pulled her through the fraying fabric of her days. The quiet after her father passed. The long evenings alone at the shop. The ache in her chest she didn't talk about. Not even with her mother. He'd never asked her to open up. He just waited. Until one night when she finally sat beside him on the porch and whispered, "I miss him." No details, no full sentence, but Ghost had rested his chin on her knee like he understood. Since he'd disappeared, something had changed inside her. Not grief exactly, more like growth, painful but necessary, as if he'd planted something in her heart, and now it was blooming, messy and raw and real. One Saturday, she visited the shelter, intending just to donate blankets. But then she saw him, a small shepherd mix, not Ghost's twin, but there was something about his eyes, not the color, the depth, like he was watching the room from a place far beyond it. She didn't even think about it. She just whispered, "Hey, you waiting on someone too?" The dog walked right up to her and leaned in, chest to her palm. They let her foster him that day. His name was Birch. Birch didn't replace Ghost. No one could. But he reminded her the connection wasn't about ownership. It was about showing up. Birch followed her everywhere. Quiet, observant, patient. He'd curl beside her when she worked late, sit at the window with his head tilted when someone passed by, and sometimes he'd stare out into the distance like he remembered something from a life before. People noticed. "Looks like someone's got Ghost spirit," they'd say, and maybe he did. Josie started walking again. At first, just short loops, then longer hikes through the woods Ghost used to patrol. She brought Birch along, Sometimes the vet, too, and once even the boy in the wheelchair who had fostered Rusty. They didn't talk much. They just walked. One foggy morning, near the old train bridge, Birch froze. He sniffed the air. Ears forward. Then he bounded off the trail. Josie called once, twice, but he didn't stop. She followed, heart racing. Through brush, across shallow creeks, up a ridge she didn't know was there, and at the top, they found her. A woman. Pale, trembling, barefoot, covered in dirt, her hands scraped, her lips cracked. She'd been missing 3 days, last seen heading into the woods after a breakdown. No one thought she'd survived. But Birch had found her, and when help arrived, Josie sat beside the woman, held her hand, and said, "You're okay. You're safe now." The woman blinked slowly and murmured, "I saw him. The white dog. He showed me the way." Josie swallowed hard. She didn't ask questions. She just nodded. The town didn't call it a miracle. They didn't call it a sign. But they did call it familiar. Because once, they too had been found. By the time winter brushed Cedar Hollow with its first veil of frost, the town had already changed. Not in structure, not in population, but in soul. People greeted one another more gently. They looked up from their routines. They noticed when the wind shifted or when the woods grew quiet. And they remembered the dog who had taught them how to pay attention. Ghost no longer came every day, but when he did, it was always at dawn or dusk. Silent, resolute, a sentinel among shadows. Josie kept the shed door cracked open, though she no longer expected him to stay. It wasn't about keeping him close anymore. It was about letting him know he was welcome. Birch had grown tall and lean, his once ragged coat now thick and brilliant, like a wild thing carved from wind and flame. He didn't bark much. He didn't need to. His presence said enough. Each time he returned to the edge of Josie's backyard, it was with the same soft tread as his father, eyes scanning, nostrils twitching at the faintest scent of change. And always, Josie left something behind. Jerky, a fresh bone, a bundle of herbs soaked in broth. It was a ritual between them now, an understanding. She never asked them to stay, but they came anyway. One morning, as snow began to fall in thick, hushed flakes, Josie found a bundle of newspaper tucked beneath the old birch tree. The ink was blurred, the paper brittle at the edges. She unfolded it with trembling fingers and found a photo, grainy, taken through a wire fence. A kennel, rows of cages, eyes staring out through rust and rot. And in one corner, half shrouded in shadow, a white dog stood with his body turned outward, head lifted. Behind him, pups huddled in a nest of torn blankets. Ghost. On the back, in a narrow, angular hand, someone had written, "He never stopped looking. You didn't either. Thank you, Josie didn't recognize the handwriting, but it didn't matter. The message was clear. Ghost had not simply survived. He had remembered. He had returned not out of fear or hunger, but for them, for the pups, for the pieces of himself he had once lost in that darkness. That evening, Josie placed the photo in a small frame and nestled it into the roots of the birch. She didn't try to shield it from the elements. Let it weather. Let it become part of the earth, like everything else Ghost had touched. The next spring, a boy named Eli showed up at her shop with a dog at his side. A young German shepherd with uneven ears and a coat too bright to be tamed. The dog sat quietly, watching every move Eli made, always between him and the door. "He found me," the boy said, biting his lip. "Out near the highway. Wouldn't let me leave, just sat there till I followed him." Josie knelt down. "What's his name?" Eli smiled shyly. "Chance." She nodded. "Good name. You both look like you needed one." They left with 2 biscuits and a promise to visit again. In the months that followed, Josie began volunteering at the wildlife center, folding blankets, wiping crates, learning to coax trust without force. And always, always, she listened for paw steps at the edge of the trees. Some nights she heard them, others just wind. But she never stopped leaving the shed open, never stopped believing that one day Ghost would return, not just to check in, but to rest. One night in late autumn, when the last leaves clung stubbornly to the oaks and a quiet fog rolled in from the river, Josie stood barefoot in her yard, mug of tea forgotten in her hand. A sound had pulled her outside, not a bark, not a whine, just presence. And there he was, Ghost, older now, slower, but still dignified, still steady. He stepped into the clearing like he belonged to it, like the woods were his cathedral, and he its only prayer. Behind him, 3 shadows followed. Birch, now nearly his equal in size, walked at his father's flank, his eyes sharp and protective. To the right, a smaller shepherd with a pale muzzle and scars on one leg, Maple, perhaps, and behind them, pausing at the edge of the trees, another, lankier, more cautious but alert, Flint. Josie didn't speak, didn't step forward. She just stood still, letting the moment root itself deep into her memory. Ghost met her gaze, not begging, not asking, just witnessing, as if to say, I see you too. And then, together they turned and disappeared once more into the forest's embrace. But Josie didn't feel the loss this time. She felt the continuity, the reassurance that some bonds were not broken by silence or distance or time. That night, as the fog deepened and the town settled into sleep, Josie lit a single lantern on the porch and whispered into the dark, You're free now. But you're always welcome. The wind shifted. The birch leaves rustled. And somewhere, deep in the woods, a dog watched the light flicker, just long enough to remember its warmth. Because some stories don't end. Some just return in different forms, on padded feet, in the hush before dawn, in the sudden quiet that makes you turn your head and listen. And in that quiet, if you're lucky, you might still hear him, the ghost who came not to haunt, but to heal.